Hello, everyone, and welcome back to This Day in History, our nightly look back at a specific day in history, where we take a look back at the events of a day, the historic context in which those events took place, and the historic ramifications of those events. As always, if you have not yet, please hit the subscribe button, the bell notification icon to be alerted anytime I post new content, and tell a friend. And without any further ado, this day in history, May the 9th. And on this day, in 1970, in the early morning hours, one of the strangest events in American history took place. Richard Nixon, the President of the United States, the previous evening on May the 8th, had given a press conference in which he explained his decision to expand American military operations into Cambodia as part of the Vietnam War. Afterward, Nixon made about 20 calls to various people. Among them were the evangelist Billy Graham, former New York governor and failed two-time Republican presidential nominee Thomas Dewey, and an NBC reporter, Nancy Dickerson, who was one of the first female reporters to cover the White House. He then slept from about 2:15 a.m. until 4 a.m. At around 4, the president awoke and put on a recording of some classical music at a loud volume. Then awoke his valet, Manolo Sanchez, he looked out at a gathering of protesters on the National Mall. Nixon asked his valet if he had ever visited the memorial at night and told him to get dressed. After his valet answered that he had not. Nixon, the White House doctor, and Sanchez, and some Secret Service agents, of course they're going to be going, drove the presidential limousine and over to the memorial. Nixon would later write he had never seen the Secret Service quite so petrified. Upon arrival, Nixon and Sanchez walked up the steps to the statue, with Nixon being a tour guide. Some students obviously noticed Nixon, and, although surprised by his arrival, shook his hand. Nixon said that students were not unfriendly to him, but seemed somewhat overawed. Nixon learned that a few of the students at the protest and vigil were from Syracuse, in which he brought up their football team. And he encouraged them to seek out some of the architecture in Europe. Along the way, Nixon would engage the students in debate, and they would get quite confrontational, which, by this time, the Secret Service figured tensions were rising. And let me just point this out for the historical record. Kent State had happened on May 4th, less than a week before this late-night visit to the Lincoln Memorial, so they were a little edgy. Nixon was pushed into the limousine, and they got him to agree to go home. Well, kind of. The Nixon then insisted on stopping at the United States Capitol, where he took his former seat in the chamber of the U.S. House of Representatives and instructed Sanchez to make a speech. Sanchez spoke about his pride in becoming a U.S. citizen, and Nixon and some female cleaners who were present applauded. Nixon would sign autographs for one of the cleaning ladies on her Bible, and held her hand and told her she was a saint, and his mother was too. By this time, Ron Ziegler and Dwight Chapin and H.R. Haldeman had arrived on the scene. Later, Haldeman and Sanchez would eat breakfast at the Mayflower Hotel. Nixon, who was determined to walk the last half mile from the hotel to the White House, was eventually told that that's not such a great idea, Mr. President, and he reluctantly got into the car. This has been a very famous event. It is profiled in the movie Nixon by Oliver Stone with Anthony Hopkins. Now, I would say, if you're wanting to watch that movie for a great historical record of Richard Nixon, that's not a movie to view, but it does capture most of the events I described in this encounter. Although I do believe in the movie version, Haldeman is present at the Lincoln Memorial, which he was not. He later joined them at the Capitol, and the Capitol I don't believe is included. It's been a while since I have seen the movie, but I do remember Haldeman being at the Lincoln Memorial in the movie. In 2011, the Richard Nixon Presidential Library Museum released a series of recordings which covered some of Nixon's recollections on the event and a memo to Haldeman. And he told Haldeman to be shared on a very limited basis. And some have described these as an attempt for damage control. Because some of the students describe Nixon in a nonsensical manner. And of course, Nixon doesn't ever talk in a nonsensical manner, even when I'm tired. But the thing is, none of them described it that way. And none of them Nixon's aides remember it that way either. And a writer in the Atlantic wrote this in 2011. Listening to Nixon describe his bizarre sojourn to the Lincoln Memorial is to hear a man who's already sold himself on an alternate version of reality. Having conceived himself this version of the facts, all that remains is for him to win over the rest of the world. Following the visit, Haldeman would confide in his diary that he was concerned about his condition and concluded that the event had been the weirdest day so far. Oh, buddy, they're about to get weirder. I can tell you that. He continues. He would also write in that same diary, he has had very little sleep for a long time, and his judgment, temper, and mood suffer badly as a result. There is a long way to go, and he is in no condition to weather it. Nixon would later come to believe that those in the anti-war movement were pawns of foreign communists. And tried to get J. Edgar Hoover to use illegal procedures to gather information on the leaders of the anti-war movement. And Mr. Hoover pushed back on that request, amazingly enough. So, as I have said, this was a very odd event, very interesting event, and one of those fun stories from history that occur, and for someone of my age, is hard to believe occurred, that the President of the United States just woke up in the middle of the night and waltzed over to the Lincoln Memorial, then went up to the Capitol and had his valet give a speech. The chief of staff and valet eat corned beef in the rib room at the Mayflower Hotel, and that the president's aides have to convince him he can't walk back to the White House. It's just one of those events, because in my lifetime, the president has been such. I mean, even at this time, the president was under immense security. But in my lifetime, the president has just been viewed as in a bubble, basically. And the Secret Service is very controlling of how presidents move. And a lot of these are results of events that would occur later, especially the president getting in and out of vehicles. That would, of course, come after President Reagan's attempted assassination in 1981. So, yes, as I said, just one of these crazy events from history. It's hard to imagine Donald Trump just waking up in the middle of the night and saying, calling his military valet or Stephen Miller or Hope Hicks and saying, "We're going to the Lincoln Memorial. Hopester, we're going to the Lincoln Memorial." He was treated bad, but I've been treated worse. That's my horrible Trump impression for you. I hope you all have a great night, a pleasant tomorrow, and I'll see you then.